We hope you enjoyed this teaching from Christ Church Birmingham. More teaching can be found at www.christchurchbirmingham.org.
So we're carrying on in the series, Is That in the Bible? And it's been everyone who stood up here and started their preach has talked about what a great series it's been, and it has, hasn't it? It's been great because you hear they're about phrases that you hear just in life, aren't they? About particular sayings that people say, perhaps with some sense of like this is right. We have some authority to say this, but we want to look and say, is that in the Bible? And so that's what we've been doing. And so the saying for today is there are many paths to God. There are many paths to God. I don't know if I'm sure you've heard that phrase or something similar said before in conversations or things that you've seen. There's quite a few examples of them that I'm sure you can think of. There's a few examples I'm going to go through right now. So most of us will have heard of Oprah Winfrey. And she said this: one of the biggest mistakes humans make is to believe there is only one way. There are many diverse paths leading to what you call God. So that's Oprah Winfrey, who've obviously got worldwide influence. So we're starting with the big ones. And she's saying she doesn't just disagree with people who says there is one way to God, but she says anyone who does believe that is making one of the biggest mistakes that you can make as a human being. Next is more of a national level. You may not heard of this one so much. When I was younger, there was a band that I was really into called The Levellers, which I don't know if no one else may have heard of them here, but anyway, I was very into them when I was young. They were very energetic and, lots of, good energy for you if you've got lots of energy to dance around to. And they wrote a song called One Way, and this was the main lyric. I'm not going to try and sing it, but I used to sing along with it, but I found that I disagreed with the words a bit, so I had to tweak the words. But it says this: there's only one way of life, and that's your own. Okay, then moving more locally, this is a photo, hopefully behind me. Ta-da. And this is from a shop around the corner from us. So, big smile from David, he knows it well. They do great samosas. If you've had samosas here on a Sunday, they come from this shop usually. Lovely guys there. I said to them, "Can I take a photo of your shelves?" And he's like, "Yeah, go for it." So you can see proof that it's a food shop from all the shelf with all the food on it. But then above it, there's a shelf and with quite a variety of different images. And mainly these are Hindu images relating to Hindu beliefs, but there's a few sort of Sikh-related beliefs as well. And I don't know if you can see it. We're going to home in on it in a minute. Oh yeah, we've got it already. So we've got the one in the middle. It's interesting. So we've got a quote from Jesus there as well. And interestingly, you're all getting it. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And that's right in the middle there. And so clearly, even in here, Jesus is being quoted. Even when he's saying, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he's being displayed as one possible way among many different ways. Next one. This is a photo I've shown before on a Sunday morning. This is again nearby, in a street near us, where it says, we're in the blue circle that I've circled on there, it says, "Jesus saves from all sins." And I took that when I was preparing for preaching on another Sunday morning. But what I didn't share, excuse me, on that particular Sunday morning is that when I took this photo, this guy came up to me and he was a bit sort of, I don't know, anxious, or maybe not, maybe just wanted to know what I was doing. He said, why are you taking that photo? So I said, I really like what's on the wall there, so I thought I'd take a photo of it. And his reply to me was something along the lines of, well, we've all got a hope in something. And the way he was speaking, he was trying to make the point, it doesn't really matter where you put your hope, as long as you put your hope in something in life, it doesn't really matter what it is. And then next, I haven't got a photo for this one, the next one, but this is a quote that I've heard quite a lot. Most of you, or many of you, know that I'm a GP, and at times I'll offer to pray for my patients, and I usually start by telling them that I want to offer them something doctors don't normally do, but I offer to pray for them because I'm a Christian and I believe that and I've seen people healed when they've been prayed for, and I explain that as I pray, I will talk about Jesus as I pray, just to sort of paint the picture a bit. And I found that lots of people respond to that offer, and lots of people who clearly believe other things other than believe following Jesus. But quite often when they accept my offer, they make this comment. Quite often, it's all the same, really. It's all the same. So, coming back to the statement, many paths to God. Just bring up the next slide. That's great. So what do people mean when they say there are many paths to God? Let's have a bit more of a think about that. So firstly, when someone says that, I guess they already believe there is a God. Some people believe there isn't a God, so they're thinking that. Secondly, they believe that as well as being a God, they want to get to him. They want to somehow reach God, somehow connect with him. Now, for some people, they might believe in God, but their belief is that God's so distant, there's no point even trying to connect with him. Or maybe they believe God is in everything and there's no need. But that's the sort of thing I think that's probably going through what's part of what they're thinking. So secondly, to say that there's many paths to God is there's the sense that to get to God, we need to travel along a certain path in life. You know, we journey in life, don't we? We go along a path in life. And there's this sense that it doesn't really matter what path you go along. It could be a path that no one else has followed. It may be that you're part of a religious belief where you're following a path that's perhaps similar to a lot of other people. Or maybe you just create your own path and it's like, well, this is what I need to do to connect with God. And then lastly, there's in that statement, there's many paths to God. It's about, well, how do we get along the path? How do we walk? How do we do that walking? How do we put in the effort to walk along the path? And there could be lots of ways of doing this. It could be a recognized practice from a particular religion. Or it could be the efforts of through reading books or studying philosophies, just thinking about it, trying to pray, or giving, being generous with things, generous with our finances, generous with our time, or maybe taking part in communities and events arranged by others who are following a particular religion. Or it might be by doing good deeds, doing good things, saying, "Oh, I'm going to help out there. I'm going to help here." So let's come back to our question from the series. So, having thought about this saying, what it is, there's many paths to God, and how, just thinking how we've looked at it, it has huge impact, worldwide impact. If you look at Oprah Winfrey, but then also the impact of just our day-to-day lives, the shops around us, the conversations we have from day to day. So is this phrase, there are many paths to God, is it in the Bible? So let's have a look. We're coming back to our quote from our friends round the corner in the samosa shop. So this is a quote. There's a bit more here. That verse, that quote came from the book of John, that John wrote about the life of Jesus, the good news story about Jesus that John wrote. And this particular quote from the book of John comes from towards the end of this story that John wrote. And it's taken from a conversation that Jesus was having with his followers. He was talking to them. They were eating together. And it was going to turn out to be their last meal together. And he knew that. He knew he was about to be arrested and tortured and put to death. And so he was preparing them. He was talking with them, trying to get it clear to them that he would be, he talks about, he's going away. So let me just read, I'm just going to read this through. Let not your hearts be troubled, because he'd already said. In fact, he'd already said quite a few times in the last couple of years that he was going to be killed. But they found it hard to grasp that. And so, but here it's about to happen. And so he's really driving the point home that he's going away. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where I am you may be also. And you know the way to where I'm going. And Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so they're worried. Thomas is worried. And Jesus is trying to reassure all of them. He's trying to reassure them by saying, look, this is going to be a temporary situation. I'm going away, but it's going to be temporary. And then he gives them some instruction, that he's going to do some things. This is how it's going to work. And he says, actually, you know the way. You know the way back to me. And I think Thomas, quite understandably, gets quite confused and struggles to understand this when Jesus says, actually, guys, you already know the way. You know it. And Thomas is like, no, I don't. And so he asks Jesus, I want to know then. I want to know. How can we know the way? So he asks Jesus this question, how can we know the way? And Jesus answers Thomas with this remarkable statement. And he tells Thomas, and he tells all of us who want to know the answer to this question, how can we know the way? How can we know it? We want to know it. What is it? And Jesus answers him so powerfully. It sounds like Thomas is almost, I can imagine Thomas almost being ready to do anything to know the way. How can we know? There's like an urgency in it. How can we know the way? We need to know this, Jesus. You're going. It's crazy. Our lives have been so caught up with you. We need to know the way. I'll do anything. Interesting when you think about that. That's about Thomas doing. I'll do anything. No, that's not in there, but I just think there's that sense of urgency in Thomas. And so Jesus just comes in and says, actually, the way is nothing to do with you, Thomas. It's not to do with you. I am the way. I am the way. And you're coming at it, I believe it's like Jesus is saying, you're coming at it from the wrong perspective. If you're looking for the path, You're asking the wrong question. What's the path? How do we do this? What do I need to do? What's the path? You're looking at it wrong because I am the way. You're looking at it all the wrong way around. It's not about you getting the right path. It's about me. It's about Jesus. And then, even more than that, he then adds to it. He doesn't just say he's a path, but he says he's the path. He's the only path that no one comes to the Father except through him. So I think Jesus answers this question quite well here in this conversation they're having around a meal. They're chatting. And Jesus takes on this saying that there's many paths to God. He says, no, that's not the case. I am the way, and I'm the only way. Let's just come back a minute to Oprah. So this is very different, isn't it? It's actually very, very different to what Oprah's saying. This influence that has in our culture, the stories that we tell, the phrases, the sayings that get used, the different similar types of things. It's very different to that. Just bring up the next slide, David, thanks. So, because it's so different, it can provoke quite a strong reaction. I was reading a story recently about a guy there's a Christian pastor, and he was invited to a public debate about who God is. With, I think there was a Jewish rabbi, there was a Muslim imam, there was three of them. And they were talking, and there was a public debate, and it was in a sort of area where there was a lot of young professionals and students and that sort of area. And he was saying, the guy who was writing the story, the Christian pastor, says that there was actually a lot of respect between the three guys who were talking, who were debating. They were very respectful of each other. At the same time, they were very clear that there were, and I get the wording right, there were significant and irreconcilable differences between their beliefs about God. So they acknowledged that as they were talking. What was interesting was some of the audience got very upset. And they came afterwards to this pastor and said things like this. Maybe there are other words that come to mind when this sort of claim that Jesus is the only way. And I'm just going to... So the guy who wrote the book is a guy called Tim Keller, who's passed away recently, but he wrote this. And I think this quote is helpful in just thinking through how we respond when we see those emotions coming. When you've got one person saying, Jesus is the only way, other people saying there are many paths. And so I'll just read this out. Ironically, the insistent that doctrines, that's beliefs about God, the insistent that doctrines do not matter is really a doctrine itself. It holds a specific view of God, which is touted as superior and more enlightened than the beliefs of most major religions. So the proponents of this view do the very thing they forbid in others. So it's saying here, you can't really argue that the belief that there are many paths to God is much more tolerant than what Jesus says about him being the only way, because if you do that, you're automatically being intolerant of what Jesus is saying. And so I believe actually the more important question in a way is, if Jesus is saying that he is the only way, who is Jesus? That's the big question then. So who is Jesus? And as we come to a close, I'm going to How are we doing time-wise? So we come to a close. We're going to have a look at who Jesus is. So if you can bring that up. So there's a list of things there. I don't know, again, when you speak to people, speak to friends, family, neighbours, or just hear people talking in the street or in the supermarket or whatever, who is Jesus? You might be able to think of some other ways that people use to describe who Jesus is, but I've got some common ones here. He's a good teacher, so people often quote Jesus, which is a correct quote. Maybe you could add this to the do unto others as you would want them to do to you. Love your neighbor. He's a good teacher. He taught us to do, he had wise, good things to say to how to live life. Or maybe it's a myth. Maybe it's just a fairy tale. It's like stories from 2,000 years ago. It's just a load of rubbish. Nice story, nice. Nice thing to hear, but it's not actually true. Or maybe Jesus was an attention seeker. He was someone very insecure and he just wanted to be famous. Maybe he's someone who would have been all over Facebook or whatever nowadays, just making stuff up about himself to try and get all the likes. Maybe that's who he was. Maybe he was a revolutionary. He was fighting against social justice. There's some element about that that's, clearly that's something he did speak against social injustice very strongly. Maybe he was suffering maybe he was ill. Maybe he was delusional. He some beliefs about himself have come in that just were not, weren't true because of illness. Or maybe he was a prophet. Again, he was. But maybe he was a prophet who was sent by God but wasn't God himself. So, let's get back to the Bible. Who is Jesus? And one way we get to know people sometimes is to find out their story, isn't it? Sometimes you hear, what's your story when people meet? Tell me your story. Tell me about yourself. What's your life? And we say that when we meet each other, don't we? How's your week been? That sort of thing. What's your story? Just to help us to continue to get to know each other. And so let's look at Jesus' story together very briefly. So I'm just going to read these quotes out. This is just skipping through quickly. So, Gospel of John, book we were looking at earlier at the beginning. Through him all things were made. Luke 2, Luke's story about Jesus, good news story about Jesus. She gave birth to her firstborn, a son. Again, talking about Jesus. And Mark, written by Mark, good news story. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him, when they crucified Jesus. Then Matthew, good news written by Matthew, he is not here. He has risen. And then finally Acts, which is also written by Luke, which is the story of what happened after Jesus had risen again, returned to heaven, and the story about the early church. And so just to briefly go through those, the first one, Jesus is the creator of the universe. He's God himself. And God himself was born into the world that he created as a baby boy and still was God. And then this boy grew up. He lived. He did some amazing things, which are just incredible. He said some amazing things, as we've already looked at. And then he was killed to take the punishment that we all deserve due to the depth of our sin against God. And then he rose again. He rose again from the dead. He wasn't just resuscitated. Sometimes in hospitals or wherever, you resuscitate people, and you do CPR, and you see stories in the paper, or not paper, sorry, on the internet from time to time, and to see that someone's been resuscitated. Perhaps at a football match, you hear, players collapse and they were, their heart was restarted. But that person will die again. Jesus conquered death. He is never going to die again. And then he returned to heaven, and he's reigning and ruling over all the universe. So that's Jesus' story in a nutshell. So through all this, he has become the way to God for us. This is how he became the only path, because in reality there is no other path that we can reach God on. We can only be reconciled with God because he became the path for us. It's not about us putting in the effort to get ourselves along a particular path. Keep walking. It's about the fact that he has already put the effort in to become our path. So, where do we fit? As we finish, where do we fit into all this? So we've started about thinking there's many paths to God. That's the saying. And the efforts that can be made by us trying to get along different paths. And then we've moved on to Jesus' claim that he himself is the path. And then on to how can it be that Jesus is the path? The story about who Jesus is shows us about who he is, what he's done, and how he became the path for us. And the Bible talks about us submitting to God's righteousness, and what this really means is we like to do things ourselves. We like to achieve things ourselves. We like to try and get through life's challenges ourselves. The biggest challenge we will ever face in life is the challenge of trying to get to God. And just like with everything else, we try to do this ourselves. By trying to go along whatever path we think is right to us. But the Bible tells us that the only way to go to God is to submit to what Jesus has already done for us. So I'm just going to end up by reading a quote we're going to sing in a minute. It's part of responding as well, but I'm just going to read out a final quote, which to me I just think sums everything up so well. When we respond to the good news, we are born again. It is not the start of a journey on a particular path to try to get to God. It is accepting the path that Jesus has already become for us. We are forgiven for everything we've done wrong. Yeah, thanks guys. Come up. We enroll as lifelong learners in the way of Jesus. We receive a place in heaven and have certainty about what happens to us when we die. Wow. So good. This is why we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. We join the mission of bringing heaven to earth. We become part of the biggest family in the world with billions of brothers and sisters. We get a new identity, becoming adopted children of God. The Spirit of God, we were hearing about that earlier. The Spirit of God fills us, comforting us, challenging us, and continually making us like Jesus. And we have a new narrative, a new story. So can we respond? I'm going to sing in a minute. Just as you see that quote up there, as I've been reading it through, maybe there's something that's grabbed you, that's put it one sentence, one word even, one phrase that's, oh, yeah, wow. It might be something you've heard 1,000 times already, but maybe it's just grabbed you this morning. Just respond to that particular thing. whatever it is, we can, as Christians, we can often get drawn in again back into trying to find our own path again, rather than to continue to accept this path that Jesus has become for us. Maybe you've never accepted Jesus as the path, as the way to God. Maybe you're here this morning, and I want to encourage you, let today be the day you accept this for your own life, that you receive this new narrative for your life, receive a new story. Oh, no. Oh, dear. Right. So let's respond.